Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today. Um, this is a central workshop for the 2027 Active Transportation Program. Um, and I'm going to hand it over to Jaden to give us some workshop logistics.
Thank you, Anya. Okay. All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our sixth Cycle 8 Central Workshop. The CTC exists to make transportation planning, funding, and policy more understandable and accountable. Our workshops can take place in diverse locations around the state so that commissioners and staff can hear directly from our stakeholders around California. The workshop agenda is located on our website at www.catc.ca.gov. Live closed captioning is available on this webinar. Please select the Show Captions tab at the bottom of your screen. There are a number of language options available there to choose from. Any document the CTC creates can be translated into any language you need. Simply email us at ctc@catc.ca.gov and we'll have them returned to you as quickly as possible. For all of our workshops, we encourage interaction with our stakeholders. There will be opportunity for questions and comments throughout this workshop. We will stop periodically throughout this workshop to address stakeholder questions. You should see the webinar control panel, likely located on the bottom of your screen. There you will find the raise hand and Q&A tabs. We encourage you to use the raise hand feature as soon as we reach the item to give the system time to acknowledge you. Commission staff will let you know when it is your turn to make your comment. Once you have been unmuted, please make sure to state your name and agency you are representing. Alternatively, you may use the Q&A tab to submit your comment or question. Commission staff will read that on your behalf. As a reminder, each registered attendee is provided a unique link or phone number to access the webinar. These should not be shared with other participants as this can create confusion for staff when making comments. Please do your best to be concise. Please make sure your comments add new information. If you agree with the comments of a previous speaker, simply make that statement. And if you face any technical issues, please reach out through the chat or Q&A tab, and I will do my best to assist you. Thank you for joining us today. I also wanted to go over a few workshop principles, so please be respectful of other viewpoints, keep a statewide perspective, and propose your ideas in a public setting so we can discuss this all as a group. Thank you all so much. I will turn it back over to Anya to go over our agenda for today.
Jaden. So today we will start with our brief program overview that we've been doing for those of you that are maybe new to the program or not familiar. And then we'll do a quick recap of our last workshop, central workshop, which was on October 16th. And we'll talk about a new section which was for the MPO component. And I wanted to point out that I know the agenda we posted said we'd talk about our policy on user accounts and a new section for that. But we're going to hold off on talking about that till the next workshop because Caltrans is working on updating the guidance, the user count guidance. So we wanted to wait until they had worked through that to bring the section to you. So that's the only change from what was posted. We do have a couple of our clarify and reduce redundancies updates, and then we have a discussion item that we were asked by a stakeholder to bring to the group. So we'll have that, and then our action items, and that is our agenda for today.
All right, thank you, Anya. So moving on to the next slide, I did want to provide a brief overview of the Active Transportation Program, especially for any new attendees at our workshop today. So the Active Transportation Program funds projects that encourage increased use of active modes of transportation, such as biking and walking. If you look at our funding, we are a reimbursement program with federal and state funds. We have about $500 million over 4 years. And looking at cycle 8, that begins in fiscal year 27-28 and continues through 2030 to 2031. When we look at our eligible applicants, there's a wide list of folks who are who are eligible. That includes local, regional, and state agencies, transit agencies, tribal governments, just to name a few examples. When we look at our distribution, the ATP funds have a set limit that they go to. So we have 50% going to the statewide component, 10% to the small urban and rural component, as well as 40% to our MPO component. When we look at eligible projects in the active transportation program, there are a few different types of eligible projects. That includes infrastructure projects, which vary in size. We have small, medium, and large rubrics for an infrastructure project. Additionally, we do have non-infrastructure projects as an eligible type, which generally include education and encouragement programs. We also have plans as a project where you can develop a community-wide bicycle plan, safe routes to school plan, or an active transportation plan that encompasses a disadvantaged community. And then lastly, we do have our combination projects, which is usually an infrastructure component associated with the non-infrastructure component. So that could be a medium or a large infrastructure component that does have that NI attached to it as well. Moving on, I did also want to provide kind of a high-level overview of the ATP program from cycles 1 through 7. So we have about 1,200 projects programmed for almost $4 billion since cycle 1. We also have almost $2 billion allocated as of fiscal year 24-25, and our total project costs are valued at over $7.4 billion to date. Going over our engagement for cycle 8. So first we have our central workshop, which you are all at right now. These are opportunities for stakeholders to meet with CTC staff, where we go over potential changes to the rubric or the application or the guidelines. And it's a great opportunity for CTC staff to get feedback from our stakeholders so that we can all be in alignment on these changes that we might be proposing. Next, we have our branch workshops, and our branch workshops are really an opportunity for CTC staff to meet with an agency and give you like an ATP 101 lesson of what the program's about, what are eligible application types. We also will schedule site visits on these branch workshops to visit your proposed projects that you might be submitting in the future. And additionally, we will give you feedback on how your agency has done in the program so far. Our request to sign up for a branch workshop did close October 31st, and we are currently in the process of evaluating our request, and we are putting together a schedule. So for those of you who have reached out for a branch workshop, you should be receiving some information from us shortly. Next, we have our site visits, and our site visits are a great opportunity to meet with CTC staff. It's really an opportunity to present to us, a project you might be submitting in cycle 8, and we can give you some feedback on the project itself and how we think it might do in the active transportation program. The registration link for the site visits are available on the slideshow, which will be made publicly available, and they are also available on our CTC website. If you go to the ATP program, you can find that link there. The site visits are ongoing until we initiate our call for projects, so feel free to sign up for those if you have not already. And then lastly, what we do have ongoing as well is our application debriefs. These are opportunity to meet with CTC staff to get some additional feedback on previously submitted applications. So for example, if you submitted an application in cycles 5, 6, 7, and you just want some additional feedback because maybe you're thinking about submitting that in a future cycle, reach out to us and we'll go over your consensus form with you and give you some comments about where things went right and maybe where some things went wrong. Okay, next I do want to go over a recap of our last workshop, which was held on October 16th. So at our October 16th central workshop, we covered a few things. First, we cover additional clarified guidelines language in part 5, as well as in part 8. We also reviewed some pending workshop items. So for example, we had a item asking, can we move the ATP to be state-only funded? We worked with some additional staff members at the CTC and essentially know the funding sources are in statute. Another workshop item we had was, will CTC consider, an alternate to the disadvantaged community qualifiers to replace the loss of the federal tools that were available? No additional qualifiers will be added at this time, and we also did not receive any additional suggestions from stakeholders. And then lastly, we did have a workshop item discussing, incorporating feedback on Submittable, and CTC staff is currently working with Submittable to make those updates. So that is currently a work in progress. Next, I will turn it back over to Anya to discuss some of these new sections.
Thank you so much. All right, so let's dive right in. Can go to the next slide. So the first section I wanted to bring to you all to discuss is a new section for the MPO component. And in our little graph here on the slide in the middle column, you'll see that it's actually a new part. It'll be part 6, the MPO component, and it'll include two kind of subsections. One that talks about the MPO regional guidelines, and another one that talks about the MPO competitive project selection process. So why are we creating a new section? The information for MPOs on how to manage their MPO component was kind of scattered throughout our guidelines. So we thought it would be helpful to consolidate it all into one section. We did meet with the MPOs separately to talk over all of the suggestions that we're going through today. They provided us some input, and so we did workshop it with them. The policies and the processes for the MPO component are remaining the same. So I'm showing you the slides today with no track changes because there was a lot of rewording and moving things around. But again, the policies and the process remains the same. So this first part is just meant to be an introduction to the MPO component. And it talks about the who will receive the funds from the MPO component, and that all of the MPO's amounts, funding amounts, are included in the fund estimate. And if a MPO does not want to do regional guidelines, or they can delegate their project selection to the commission. And so that's covered in this first part here. Next slide. And then in the first kind of subsection, we talk about the MPO regional guidelines. And what we cover here is basically where MPOs can adopt something different from the statewide program. Not gonna go through a lot of it here. Basically, some of the big differences are they can require a match, and they can also have a supplemental call for projects, and you'll see some sub-bullets there. If an MPO chooses to do that, they do also have to include in their selection process all of the applications submitted to the state that were not programmed in the statewide component. So again, this is how the policy has always been and the process has always been. We're just kind of memorializing it here. Next slide. So this section talks about the competitive project selection for the component. And basically, the existing guidelines, the 2025 guidelines, do cover some of this, but it's very basic. And so what we've done here is really flesh it out and add a lot of detail and really outline all of the items that the commission is currently requesting from the MPOs when they're submitting their draft program of projects to us. So again, I won't go through each item individually, but you can see here that you know, there's quite a list here, and so we thought it would be best to memorialize. And if you go to the next slide, kind of continues, and let's see if there's something on this slide I want to point out. Yeah, so in the paragraph at the bottom of the slide here, this just talks about that a MPO can choose to recommend a project with uncommitted funds and kind of some of the restrictions that goes along with that. Again, this is something that is not new. It was included in other sections of the guidelines. So just putting it all here into one section for ease of access. And I think there's one more slide on this section, and this outlines some of the statutory requirements that have always been in place. So again, nothing new. Yeah, so those are the changes. I'm going to stop there and see if there's any questions on this, any feedback. Happy to hear that now. Please raise your hand, or you can put a comment in the question and answer box. Okay, not seeing anything. We can move on to the next part. So we had one other section we wanted to talk about with regards to clarifying and simplifying the language. If you go to the next slide, please. So this is the section on scope changes in the amendment requests. And basically, again, all of the edits you'll see on the screen in this slide and the next slide are clarifying text edits. We're not changing any of the policy or how scope change is submitted. And some of the language is to align with how things are worded in our other program guidelines, just so that the same processes are kind of have similar wording. And if you go to the next slide, these are also some additional edits that we're proposing that basically just are clarifying our existing process and hopefully making it a little bit more straightforward in terms of the language. And I'll stop there and see if there's any feedback or any questions, comments. Okay. Seeing none, if you all think of something on either these suggested edits or on the MPO component later on. Happy to take those comments or input at any time. Okay, we are just flying through this. So next slide. Um, so as I said in the beginning, we did have a stakeholder suggestion on a process, and I wanted to bring this as a discussion item to the group. So again, this is a discussion item. This is, we want to hear your input and your feedback on this before we suggest anything or move forward. So next slide. So you'll see kind of some language on this. I'm going to walk you through it before I open it up for feedback and discussion. So the process of concern that was brought up from the stakeholder is the way that the statewide and small urban and rural components fund the projects on the lines. So what that means is currently in the statewide and small urban and rural components, we fund to the maximum dollar amount that's in our fund estimate. And in most cycles, including our most recent cycle, cycle 7, that means we can only fund, partially fund one project that's on the line, meaning it's the last project that we are able to fund. And what we've been doing, our current process involves that we work with the applicants of those projects to see how we can fully fund them. And in some cycles, that means utilizing any savings that we have to fully fund the projects. And that's the current process. That's what we've been doing. So the stakeholder brought up a concern with the current process that by doing that, we could be exceeding the statutory funding split between the components. So specifically that the statewide component and the small urban and rural components were exceeding the 50% and 10% amounts respectively, as Jaden covered kind of in our little program recap at the beginning. So you can see on the slide on the left is an alternate process. While this is not exactly what was suggested by the stakeholder, this is an alternate process that, should everybody be on board, is something that the commission could also support. And it's something that we think would address the concerns brought up by the stakeholder while still kind of fulfilling, the needs that we see in terms of funding for the programming for the statewide component and the small urban and rural component. So basically, I'll just kind of read through the new process that was suggested. So we would utilize the fund estimate process as a reminder to those of you who don't know. When we adopt our final guidelines, we also adopt a fund estimate that outlines the amounts that will be distributed via the statewide component, small urban and rural, and MPO components. So we would utilize the fund estimate kind of mid-cycle. So it would be a second fund estimate. So in August of each odd numbered year, project savings, including funds recovered from lapsed project phases and canceled projects, would be redistributed per the statutory funding split. And let you read that because I've said it a few times already. So at that time, recovered funds for the statewide and small urban and rural components would be distributed in the following ways. One, projects adopted into the contingency list for each component would be programmed into the current program cycle, not to exceed the total funds available in this mid-cycle fund estimate. And number two, if the mid-cycle fund estimate for each component is not enough to fully fund a project on the contingency list for each component, the savings would then be held onto and made available in the subsequent program cycle for that component. And funds recovered for the MPO component would be made available in the MPO component in the subsequent program cycle. Just because of how the MPO component is managed and how the MPOs each manage their own contingency lists. So on the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see the changes from the way we currently do things. We would have a mid-cycle fund estimate that would be approved by the commission. That would be a new thing. So of course, the mid-cycle fund estimate would be a formal way to redistribute any savings that are identified in the program. And the other change from the current process is that the state would adopt contingency lists. So at the time of programming, we would adopt our program of projects, and then we would adopt a contingency list. And I would imagine that the contingency list would just continue to, be the list of projects in terms of score. It would be the same. It would be organized the same way we program our statewide and small urban and rural components. Yeah. So I'll stop there. I see we have a question.
Yeah, Anya, I can read the question for you. So
Sure. Thank you.
yeah, no problem. So we do have a question that asks, are the statutory requirements for the percentages in each portion of the program for the CTC to program by those percentages, to allocate, or to spend? Or is the statute open to interpretation?
That's a great question. So I can give an answer, but I think I would want to check statute to double check. But I believe the statutory requirements for the percentages are specific to programming projects, which is why we have the fund estimate. So yeah, the fund estimate drives the number of projects that we can program.
Okay, and then it looks like we have a hand up from Kenneth Cow. You are now unmuted and free to make your comment.
All right. Thank you, Anya. This is Kenneth Cow with the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. Want to appreciate you for this. I think this is a good way of recognizing that savings can be redistributed via the formula that's in statute. I think another thought would have been also to ensure that the funds would return to where they were generated, but I understand there might be some technical and kind of staff kind of resource concerns about that. So I think this is a nice middle ground. I did have a question about kind of what happens like you said previously for the statewide component, when you would have a project on the line and you don't have enough funds to fully fund that project, then you would dip into the savings. Under this scenario, in your proposal, would that mean that like where we do have a project on the line, either we would not fund that project and leave that funding unprogrammed, hoping for savings in the mid-cycle fund estimate and then program it? Or would we be like asking the sponsor to come up with other funds to make it whole? And then if there are savings, would we program those savings to that project that said that they were whole? Like kind of I'm just curious like what happens now under the this new scenario when there is a project on the line.
Yeah, that's a great question, Kenny. Thanks. And thank you for your comment. So, that's something that I I would want to kind of think about and talk through some ideas that I have. I can share those. But so what I would imagine is we would either under program, which means that we would not program to the full um, amount identified in the fund estimate if we cannot fully fund, the next project in terms of the highest score. Or, we could also like you said, if the project sponsor is able to identify local or federal or other funds, then we could program it, because it would then be fully funded with local funds. The remaining amount would be fully funded with local funds, or another scenario would be that, uh, you know, we do allow the MPOs to only fund pre-construction, um, one or more pre-construction phase for their projects on the line. And we could maybe talk about doing something similar in the statewide and small urban and rural components. However, again, the project sponsor would have to agree to that because that means they would potentially come back in a future cycle for their construction funds and, would have to go through the competitive process again. So it would be kind of whether or not they'd want to. But yeah, those are kind of some things I was thinking about in answer to the question that you had. Again, there's a couple different options, I guess, that could be um, considered.
Thank you. And if I can add another one, I wonder if there is flexibility. And I realize this probably would require another guidelines change. Is if the other portions, i.e., the large MPO and small urban or rural, if they have the ability to overprogram as well, like what you did in the statewide portion, up to maybe a certain level, with the understanding that hopefully that will be, made up through the savings mid-cycle, or, if it's not, then deducted from the next fund estimate as
Yep.
another option.
That is another option. Yes,
Okay,
thank you.
thank
Yep.
you.
Yeah.
If I can maybe just add to that, my preference would be to allow some flexibility in overprogramming. I think that would give sponsors a little bit, more certainty that yes, we are funding you, especially if it's just like, a little bit over, right?
Yeah.
So I do appreciate if that could be, considered as a flexibility for the other components outside of the statewide. Thanks.
Noted. Thank you, Kenny.
So, Anya, just to clarify, we don't actually overprogram.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
So that
we
would be new if
yeah,
we overprogram. Yeah.
because we program to the fund estimate, and then when the savings become available, then we program the rest.
Yeah.
Oh, got it. Thanks.
Yeah.
So Aaron was asking how much overprogramming might the CTC consider? Um, I don't have an answer to the question, I guess.
Hey,
Aaron, you have your hand raised.
yeah, I will unmute Aaron. Aaron, you are now free to provide your comment.
All
Thank
right,
you.
thank you. Yeah, after typing that in, I thought it probably might be worthwhile if I just had an opportunity to further delve into that question. Yeah, so if with Kenny's suggestion about might we consider over programming to fulfill a project in that cycle, and then deduct that amount from the following cycle, it started to make me wonder, okay, are we talking maybe $2 million, or was this a very large project that maybe we're looking at 10 million or more? And so I just that popped up into my mind. And I think in most years, the following program cycle could absorb that amount. But do we want to talk about or look back historically at, what has the cutoff been for that one extra project, and how much would we have needed to over program? So I just wanted to put that out there for food for thought.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, Aaron, and in cycle 7, it, you know, it was quite a bit for one project, and then it wasn't as much for another project. So that was on the line. So, yeah, it's just going to vary, I guess, depending on how projects score and where our fund estimate dollars and which project and which score. Yeah.
Okay. And Anya, may I ask another question while I have the mic open? Okay. So if there are projects that are adopted onto a contingency list,
Mhm.
and let's say for whatever reason, well, one, I don't know if you really specified, how many projects or maybe a dollar threshold that we would consider for a contingency list. What happens to those projects on the list, say if they're not funded mid-cycle? Do they remain on the list, or does everything restart over during the next cycle?
So, I mean, they would remain on the list because the contingency list would be in effect, basically until the programming of the next cycle. However, I imagine there wouldn't be any funds to program any more projects on the contingency list unless one of the program projects in that component were to decline funds or something, would kind of open up some of the programming. So yeah, in this scenario, after the mid-cycle, kind of programming of any projects on the contingency list, those projects would then kind of just know that they would, be in the unsuccessful list, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know if that
Yeah.
answered your question.
That does, yeah. I was just
Okay.
wondering if they stay on this contingency list for perpetuity or just for that cycle only, and then
It
they're
would be-
considered a
yeah.
new project in the
Yeah.
following cycle.
Yeah, they would have to reapply in the following cycle. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, I think we have 2 more hands, Shelley and then Mitch.
Yeah, Shelley, you are unmuted and free to provide your comment.
Hi, thank you. Shelley Kwan with LA Metro. I have 2 questions. They're sort of related. I'll start with if a project is taken up off the contingency list for funding, would they be allowed to update the years that they requested the ATP funds, or potentially shift the distribution of funds in the case that, after the final components were adopted, they just went ahead with their project and they don't need the ATP funds for, environmental or something, or they have other projects going
So-
on where they need to push out the ATP project. Yeah, just many
Yeah.
circumstances.
Yeah. No, it's a good question. So the way that this would work, so taking cycle 7 as an example, right? So in in cycle 7, we adopted the statewide and small urban and rural components in December of 2024, which is an even numbered year. The MPO component was adopted in June of 2025, which is kind of the end date in terms of adopting our ATP cycle in statute. So that closed out cycle 7 programming. So with this process that's outlined on the slide, in August of 2025, we would have looked at, whether or not a mid-cycle fund estimate is appropriate, to redistribute any savings that would be available. And the cycle 7, the first fiscal year of cycle 7 starts in July of 2025. So really, any projects on the contingency list would only be losing 1 month, or maybe 2, technically. So I don't really see a need for moving anything around unless there was maybe the intent to advance allocate should they be programmed.
Yeah. I guess if this commission has to adopt a contingency list, would that happen? Well, would the projects unfunded in the MPO component be on that contingency list? And so we might need some time to develop that. And then the commission would adopt the contingency list, and then a subsequent meeting would have the funds programmed? Or, how
Yeah.
I'm not
So-
sure that 1 month is the true delay.
Well, so the statewide component, let's just talk about the one component, but I mean both, because we program the projects for statewide and small urban and rural at the same time. At the time of programming, the contingency list would also be adopted. So because that is before MPOs even submit their draft program of projects to the commission, I imagine that we would not include MPOs on any projects that are going to the MPOs for consideration on the statewide component contingency list. And then, of course, the small urban or rural component does not, like, none of those projects would ever go to the MPO. So that's its own category.
So what happens to the projects that aren't funded in the MPO component?
Yeah, so I mean, the MPOs have the option of adding those to their contingency list. And so that would be the option, yes.
I see. I guess maybe I'm not grasping it, but I don't know what would be on a statewide component contingency list if it's not going to be the projects that aren't funded in the MPO component. But maybe I need to sit with this for a while.
Yeah, so this is, if this process is like, if everybody's like, yay, yes, please do this, we want this, we would have to work through some of those things. So what I was saying just now about the contingency list are just kind of my initial thoughts. But yes, I would also have to kind of sit with it and run through some scenarios and see what that would look like. And at a later workshop, if we move forward with this process, we would bring forward new language to be considered by the stakeholders. So yeah. Thanks, Shelley. And those were my initial thoughts.
Yeah. No, thank you for letting me think out loud about this. And this
Yeah,
is
no,
really
it's good.
interesting. So I look forward to continuing talking about it.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Thank you,
All
Shelley.
right.
We do have another hand up from Mitch Weiss. Mitch, you're unmuted and free to provide your comment.
Thank you. So I have three comments. The first is this seems much ado about nothing. I would argue if the CTC is programmed according to the 50-40-10, then they met the statutory requirement. Nobody's going and looking at project closeout, seeing what the savings are at the very end. You've just got to come up with a point when you met the statute. And I would say if somebody doesn't like it, you should just tell them they can sue you. The second thing is, if you do want to account for all this, it might be possible to look at the historical rate of project failure and savings and just apply that to everybody to come up with a program capacity. And that's not unlike something that is done sometimes in other programs. So, for example, if the statewide component had $100 million and there was always across the board 5% of project savings and failures, then it would just be a program capacity of $105 million. And so that way you don't have to worry about a mid-cycle fund estimate. You'd have to adjust at the end, at the next cycle, to see what really happened, but that may be a simpler way to do it. And I think the third thing, just kind of what Shelley was talking about, if there was a statewide contingency list, I would think it would have to be made up of projects from the small urban and rural that didn't get funded, and projects from the MPO that applied to the statewide competition and didn't get funded in either of those two. And then those would have to all go back to their statewide score and get thrown back in the mix. It would seem like, though, the larger MPOs would be less likely to end up with a project because they would get more money and then thus be able to go farther down their list. So just some thoughts. Thank you for letting me share.
Thank you, Mitch. Definitely something to think about. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Mitch. Okay, Anya, we have a few additional written comments. The first one is from Summer Lopez. She asked, I want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. Would savings in the MPO component be only available to MPOs? We usually adopt a contingency list as part of our selected projects. These projects would not be considered as part of the statewide. Is that correct?
Yes. So okay. So let me address each question separately. So the first question, savings in the MPO component would only be available to MPOs. That's not what is being suggested on the screen. I think that's along the lines of what Mitch was suggesting. So what is being suggested on the screen is that we just kind of take all the savings from any component, all the canceled projects and lapsed project phases, all the funds recovered from that from any component, doesn't matter. We kind of create a new pot that is then distributed through this mid-cycle fund estimate. So, canceled projects or lapsed phases, project savings, are not kept in the component in which they were originally programmed. And then the second question, so yeah, that would be something that we need to work through. So I'll just read the comment again. It says, we usually adopt a contingency list as part of our selected projects, and by we, she means the MPOs. So these projects would not be considered as part of the statewide contingency list. Is that correct? And what I was saying, kind of my initial thoughts are like, yes, that's correct. But I think it kind of needs to be flushed out a little bit and mulled over. to see. So Summer, please raise your hand if like you have additional comments or if I didn't quite answer what you were asking. Okay. I think we can go to the next comment. And Summer, if you need to, please raise your hand at any time.
Yeah, Anya, thank you. Just wanted to confirm, Summer did say that answered my question.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Next comment is from Helen Finger, and she asks, so are all small urban on a contingency list too?
Yes. So the small urban and rural component would have its own contingency list with only the projects that are eligible for that component.
Thank you, Anya. We had another question from Aaron Hoyt. Aaron asked, I agree, or comments, I agree with Shelley. I need some time to digest this and understand the changes. I would like to discuss this item further.
Okay.
And that is the end of our written comments at this time.
Thank you. So, it sounds like a lot of you would like to kind of sit with this and maybe digest it a little further and formulate some responses or feedback after you've had some time to think about it. I think we've taken note of all of the comments. I really appreciate the feedback. I think it's just really important for us to know where you're at and what you're thinking about, and kind of what's important to you, I guess, as well, you know. So, I'm gonna pause here and see if there's any other questions or comments, anything else anyone would like to bring up on this topic.
Anya,
Yeah.
could you, Shelley, would you mind explaining what your question is again?
Yeah,
I'm
and
not
Shelley,
sure if I
there
followed
you
you.
go. Thank you for raising your hand. One moment. Okay, Shelley, you're free to make your comment.
Okay. I was asking, do the unfunded MPO projects go back onto the statewide contingency list? Because the statewide component is open to MPO projects and small urban and rural projects, right? And so if the MPO projects aren't going back onto the statewide contingency list, is it then only the small urban and rural projects on there?
Um, I see what you're saying.
I think they'd be on both.
Yeah. On both
Yeah,
the MPO and the statewide, or
yeah,
the
it's
MPO would stay on the statewide contingency list.
yeah. So it's somewhat similar to when we get augmented funds and program more projects. This is a complication that okay, if it's an MPO project, who programs is it the MPO or the state? Um, so we could maybe look at that too on their augmentation guidelines.
Ellie, did you have something else, or was your hand still raised from last time?
It was still raised from last time, but
Okay.
since I had a second to sit here, I do just want to clarify the bullet that says the commission may choose to prioritize projects based on the project delivery schedule. Was that a separate sort of evaluation than the tiebreaker?
Yeah, no, it was meant to kind of help prioritize projects the same way we do with the tiebreaker. Yeah. So those two sub bullets, I think those are open for updates because, the first bullet says only fully funded projects can be adopted into the program, which is true of our programming policies. But, like I said, kind of one scenario or one option could be that we allow for kind of the same way we do in the MPO component, where the statewide component could just fund the pre-construction phases for a project that's on the line or yeah. So I think, those are all things that kind of need further thought, should we move forward with something like this.
Got it. Okay, thank you. That's it for me.
Okay. Those great questions. Anyone else? Any other thoughts out there? There are no wrong thoughts. Okay. Well, last call for any other comments or questions, because this is kind of our last slide in terms of content for the workshop. Before we move on to our action items and kind of going over the next steps. So we kind of flew through things today. I want to offer to everyone, we'll stay on after we go through those items and, happy to talk about anything we talked about today or answer any questions that you might have. And I'll just say too that I really hope if you haven't already that you sign up for a site visit. We've been doing those. We've had quite a few already, and they're really great and hopefully, really helpful for potential and future applicants. So we're happy to do them. And we really hope you take advantage of that. So let's go to the next slide, Jaden, and can, oh,
Okay, great. Thanks, Anya. All right, so the next slide we have on here is to go over any action items that were brought up today in today's meeting. The only thing I think I may have captured, Anya, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the action item I've listed was kind of based on Kenny's comment of allowing some level of flexibility of over programming. Is that something we would
So-
consider an action item?
well, so I think that was in relation to this kind of alternate process for a mid-cycle redistribution of some available funds. So I would say let's put on our action items that we will revisit that item at a future workshop after everyone has had some time to mull it over. And, I would also say if you have any thoughts or feedback that you want to email to us, to our staff, please do that, and we can share that and incorporate it into the conversation when we revisit it. Yeah.
Thank you, Anya. Noted. Okay, so looks like our action item is to revisit this discussion on that mid-cycle update at a future workshop. All right, everyone. So next steps, we wanted to provide some information on our next workshops. So let's see, December 4th is our next one. That will be a hybrid workshop in Riverside. You can still attend virtually. I believe the link may be through Teams, so stay on the lookout for that. And at our PSR equivalency workshop, we'll actually have Caltrans staff at the meeting to go over, the PSR equivalency, and that's a very helpful workshop we'll have. So definitely recommend attending that. And then back to our regular workshops on December 10th, we have one scheduled virtually to go back to our discussion on the ATP guidelines. Again, you can register for these links. They are available on our website, but they'll also be available in this presentation, which will be made public shortly. Last thing I wanted to provide is our contact information. So on the screen, you'll see emails for the ATP staff at the CTC. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions or comments. We're more than happy to get back to you as soon as we can. Other than that, I will turn it back over to Anya to close us out.
Thanks, Jaden. I wanted to also note on our December 10th workshop, I hope you can all attend. We are hoping to kind of close out some, like all of the remaining items for our guidelines. There's a couple sections that we still need to discuss with you all, with our stakeholders. And then we'll post the agenda and you'll kind of see our final topics there, but we're hoping to also start the conversation on the application. And those of you who were at the kickoff workshop, you'll remember me saying that we're not proposing a lot of changes to the applications, but there are some things that we wanted to kind of give you updates on and talk through. So we're hoping to start the conversation on that at our December 10th workshop, but stay tuned. So with that, that's all we have for you today. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for your time. We really appreciate it. We really appreciate your engagement and your feedback. And yeah, I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon. And like I said earlier, we'll stay on. And if you have any questions, please feel free to stay on and ask.
think Blake may have left already, but we did have a written comment from Blake Dunford saying, thank you for all the information. So thank you, Blake, if you're still here.
Thank you. So I don't see anyone with questions, and I think most people have left. So I think we'll say goodbye for today, and we hope to see you at the next workshop. Thank you.